What is up, guys? It's MMA here, back with another video. Today I'm going to be breaking down another fight on UFC 300. If you haven't already, you should check out my early prediction for the main event. I'll have it linked in the card right now. And today we're going to be breaking down the matchup between Charles Oliveira and Arman Tsarukyan for the lightweight #1 contender match. And normally when I break down a fight, I'd like to talk about, the ways that a certain guy is going to win that fight, but instead I'm going to talk about all the ways that Arman can't win this fight. So I'm actually going to drag my face cam off of the screen, but I'll bring it back on at the end for you guys so I can say goodbye. But the presentation, I'll just have myself off here in the abyss. So starting off here, you can tell from the thumbnail that I think the main chance that Arman has in this matchup is by KO. And I do think that people are still underrating Charles going into this matchup. The fact that he was an underdog at opening is crazy to me. And we'll talk about why. So let's talk about Arman and his odds to win this fight by sub, first and foremost. So let's look at his fight since this Mateusz Gamrot loss. We know that he hasn't won any of his fights since that by submission. You can see that all the way down. You have to go until he was in League S70, Platforma S70, all the way back in August of 2017 in order to get his last submission win. And then we go down who these guys that he was beating by submission actually are. This guy that he got this first win over was actually kind of decent. Not like in terms of who he was beating. He is like a low-level dude in terms of the competition that he was defeating. But his record wasn't terrible, and this was his only loss by sub, so I don't have anything to knock on that win, which is the same for this win down here against this Alexander Marazeko guy. But on these other three, this middle one's the funniest. Nizamuddin Ramazanov has 3 losses by sub in his 8-6 record. It's half of his losses, so not super impressive. And then Alexander Belik, he just really loves subbing guys named Alexander, I guess. He's 9-5. So if I'm going to include the 8-6 guy, if you're 9-5 against bums, then it's pretty rough for you, my guy. But this one's my favorite. It's Gustavo Wurlitzer, this guy who I have here in transparent. And he has a 27-29 career record with 19 losses by sub, which is just ridiculous. They're feeding this guy to him like he's in boxing, dude. This is what they're supposed to do to build up guys like Canelo. Man, is feed him Gustavo Wurlitzers. But one thing I want to say is that Gustavo Wurlitzer in Charles Oliveira. So you're going to need to have a lot higher caliber submission game than what we've seen from Arman Tsarukyan, who, by the way, to this point in his UFC run, has been credited with, try and guess how many submission attempts. If you guessed 0, you are correct. That's the amount of submission attempts that he's gone for in the UFC. It's not really part of his game. It's not super likely. And that's the game plan that Islam demonstrated on how you can beat Charles, is hurt him and then tie up a submission. And you have to be able to hurt him, and you have to be able to tie up a submission. So we're going to talk about all of that in this video, about whether Arman's going to be able to do that against Charles. Let's look at how Charles has been able to be subbed. He has 4 career losses by sub. The most recent one we should all know, that's to Islam Makhachev by arm triangle choke. Then you've got these ones to Ricardo Lamas and Anthony Pettis, both by guillotine choke, back-to-back fights from each other. Pretty quick turnaround, too, you can see here. Anthony Pettis, I don't have anything crazy to say about Ricardo Lamas. He has the same amount of career wins as Arman Tsarukyan by submission, and he actually got some of his in the UFC, namely over Charles fucking Oliveira. So that's a pretty credentialed submission, if you ask me. Anthony Pettis has 8 wins by sub. Some of the notable ones that come to my mind is that he subbed Benson Henderson by armbar, if I'm not mistaken. He subbed Dustin Poirier, I'm pretty sure, as well. So he's got some credentialed subs. He has also subbed Charles Oliveira, which is a great thing to be able to say. And then the last loss to sub was actually how Charles lost his undefeated record, and that was to Jim Miller by knee bar. And Jim Miller has 20 career wins by sub, which is crazy. So there's also one common factor between all of these, and that's that this is all quitter era Charles, which we are not in. We're not in quitter era Charles. He only quit for that Islam fight, but it was because Islam hurt him really bad, basically had him knocked out and locked up that sub. And the one thing that Oliveira could do to try and escape, he did try and give up his back, but Islam didn't let him, so he had to do the tap where he had to go to sleep, and that's he chose to tap. So no shame really in that one there. But we're not in quitter era Charles. It's been a really long time since a guy's been able to submit him. And again, we're going to need to see that be part of Arman's game before I'm convinced that he's going to do that against Charles Oliveira. Could he do that? 100%. This game's unpredictable. I just confidently picked Aaron Blanchfield in that main event, and I'm getting trolled the entire day. I'm still getting troll comments about it right now. I love it. Keep them going. I don't care. Charles Oliveira is not going to lose this fight, though. And if I lose this one, feel free to troll me about this one, too. And if he loses it by sub, double the trolling. But the tape study here of Arman's game when he goes for sub attempts, which is to say rarely, if never, pretty much, he's not going to be able to lock one up against Charles Oliveira, would be my guess, because he is not these guys, pretty clearly. I think you can see the differences as well. So, he could potentially lock up a submission if he hurts Charles, but I just don't know that I could see him going for it. I think I would see him going for a ground and pound finish instead. And we will talk about if Arman goes for a ground and pound finish instead, what that looks like too. But we're going to go on to talk about decision instead. So we're going to do a quick pop quiz here. How many losses across his 9 career losses? We know that 4 of them are by submission. How many losses does Charles have by decision? I'm going to give you guys a couple of seconds. You can pause right now if you need to. Go ahead. Guess. Alright. If you guessed C, 1 career loss, you're correct. That is how many losses Charles Oliveira has suffered in his career by decision. And I just wanted to illustrate how credentialed his career is. Right up here is the Beneil Dariush fight that he just most recently won. And if you go all the way down here to his fight with Andy Ogle, I haven't even counted it. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23 fights. You still haven't gotten to that single decision loss yet, but you do have the 2 other decisions, I believe. You do have the decision against Tony Ferguson, which he won, and the decision against Jeremy Stephens, which he won. Both notoriously hard guys to finish, but you can see just finishes after finishes here, most of the losses by finish as well, but the couple of times that he did go to a decision, he won it as well. Now, let's get to the one loss that he did have. It was right after that Andy Ogle win in terms of going back in his career, so chronologically right before the Andy Ogle win. But it was on this run from Frankie Edgar. Right after losing to Jose Aldo by unanimous decision, he beat Charles Oliveira, would go on to finish BJ Penn, finish Cub Swanson, beat Uriah Faber by unanimous decision as well, knock out Chad Mendez in round 1, and then set himself up to lose to Jose Aldo again. But an incredible run from from Frankie Edgar that Charles Oliveira happened to be a victim of, but he didn't get the worst of it. He didn't get subbed by neck crank, and he ain't knocked out in round 1 or round 3. He managed to go the distance with Frankie Edgar, and this was even, arguably still during quitter era Charles, maybe like the start, kind of middle of quitter era Charles. So, certainly not as bad of a knock, and also, I will say that he ain't Frankie Edgar, bro. He ain't Frankie Edgar. So, one thing, and we'll talk about it more later, is that he'd be lucky to make it to a decision, much less win it. What do I mean by that, and what do I mean by Charles's urgency? I'll explain it in full later. But essentially what I'm saying here is that in any event, if he's down on the scorecards, or if Charles is down on the scorecards, it's going to start getting more dangerous for Arman, more so than it'll get more dangerous for Charles. Obviously, it will get more dangerous for Charles if he's on the scorecard, because he has to force the action, and Arman will be aware of that. But I think that the danger Charles brings in that kind of scenario is a lot more than the danger that Arman's going to be bringing back. So, That begs the question. Knockout. That's a maybe, right? Charles is chinny. He gets knocked down. But we're not talking about knocking him down, which I do have full confidence that not only can Arman do, but he's very likely to do it over the course of their fight. Unless Charles sparks him out early, which is very possible as well. But all of these guys were... Wait, why did it take away my pictures? Oh, man. This is so sad. Here, let me drag the pictures out for you guys. Okay, we got Islam. Oh, cool. Now you guys want to show up. That's cool. I promise, guys. They were all here before. Okay. All of these guys could not knock out Charles. Islam was able to knock him down, but he had to get the submission to finish it up, and I think that was the correct decision, too. Because if he would have tried to finish Charles, I'll talk about what I think would have happened if he would have gone for the knockout on the ground. Gaethje was able to knock down Charles a couple of times in their crazy one-round fight, but he was too scared to follow him down every time. Dustin Poirier was able to land with power on Charles, never able to knock him out, never able to submit him either. For the record, that guillotine wasn't able to have success. Tony Ferguson, not able to knock him out, and while it was a depleted Tony Ferguson, he still was able to, at that point, be dangerous to people. He wasn't that depleted. And also Michael Chandler wasn't able to knock him out either. And across all of these guys, they have 63 KOs. Makhachev, the least of those, but he was getting way more dangerous on the feet, as he showed to Volk in that rematch. I don't want to hear about the short notice stuff. He would have been just as dangerous still if Volk was on a full camp, because his striking is that good, and that left kick game plan was extremely well thought out. But none of these guys were able to knock out Charles. They were able to put him in bad situations, all four of these guys. Tony Ferguson wasn't able to, but that's because that was a grappling heavy fight. But none of these guys were able to put out Charles. So Arman certainly could. I could see that happening. But if any of these guys couldn't, it makes me a lot less likely to believe that he is going to just flat put him out. So then that means that he's going to knock him down. So if he scores a knockdown, I do think he's going to follow up. I don't think he's going to be like Gaethje and let Charles up from it. But there's a couple of reasons I don't think that's really going to be great. I think that, one, Charles is very skilled at controlling posture, which you saw in the Islam fight as well as in a lot of his other fights. When guys get on top of him, he's able to stop them from teeing off and getting their posture to actually land powerful shots on him. The second thing is that he can threaten submissions to stifle the offense of the other guy too. So that doesn't mean that he's going to get, say, an arm bar if he rolls for it, or a leg lock if he rolls for it. But since you have to defend that, that's either going to change the position or force you to stop hitting him, which gives him more time to shake off the cobwebs. And one other thing too is that Arman can be really powerful. And it's kind of a weird thing in the tape study for him that at times he lands and just puts guys out, like the Beneil Dariush fight. There's questions to how much that was Charles depleting the chin of him, and also Beneil Dariush kind of being towards the latter stages of his career. There are questions about that. But you also have other fights with him. He was able to knock down Mateusz Gamrot at one point in their fight, but he wasn't able to put him out, obviously, which is why he was ultimately lost that fight. There was also the ground and pound in his fight with Joaquin Silva, where he did get the stoppage, but these were not shots that had juice on them. It's the shots at the end of the fight when you're gassed, but he didn't seem gassed. He just wasn't really getting any power on these shots. So that's why I say he has pillow hands on the ground. It's sometimes it's just because, I don't know, it seemed like the technique was there, but he just wasn't really getting enough impact. Like, Joaquin Silva was shelling up because he was hurt from strikes on the feet, but the strikes on the ground weren't hurting him further. They weren't having impact if you watch that fight back. I'll stand by that take. And then, so I don't think by virtue of all of those things that he's going to knock Charles out on the ground, but if he knocks him down and tries to go for a sub, I think he's getting subbed. Because if you look at his fights with Gamrot and Makhachev, they were very scramble heavy, and he lost both of them. He was super competitive with both of those guys. He lost a decision. I think he should have won to Gamrot, but the judges saw it the other way, and it was competitive enough that it's not really like something you could call a robbery in that case. And he pretty clearly lost to Makhachev as well. And the reason that I bring those up is that because Makhachev was able to control Charles in round 1, but he kind of just had to stay in like a really flat guard position and keep Charles as collapsed as possible, not let Charles use his legs, not let Charles pivot his hips or anything like that, or advance position. And anytime he gave him any room to operate, Charles got incredibly dangerous, which is why you actually didn't really see Islam wanting to go to the ground all that much in round 2. I'm not saying that Islam was scared of going to the ground with Charles, but he saw that it was dangerous enough for him and that Charles had enough openings on the feet he could exploit that it wasn't the easiest path to victory for him anymore. So he didn't want to go to it. So I don't think that we could see Arman, even with a stunned Charles, having that much success on the ground. I could ultimately be proven wrong in this, but I don't think his submission game, like I've said, has the repetitions that someone like Makhachev's does, because Makhachev is even more advanced than someone like Khabib, who has an underrated submission game. In his pro fights before making it to the UFC, Makhachev at one point even hit like a triangle choke on someone from side control, which is not a choke that you see super often in MMA. It's more of a jiu-jitsu thing. So, like I said, if Makhachev didn't feel like he was going to get work done on the ground with Oliveira, then I have less confidence in Arman getting anything done, even if Charles is hurt. And then let's get back to decision and talk about that. So, why wouldn't Arman be able to win a decision? I think there's two big reasons, and this is where I articulated. I'd talk about them later. One is that, let's say Arman's losing, right? I think that would be that Arman is able to, be technical on the feet, but Charles is disciplining him with his power, and Charles is largely winning these rounds, right? We're en route to a decision. Charles isn't able to implement his grappling. Arman is able to grapple to some extent, but Charles neutralizes it, and his moments on the feet are too big, and he's winning these rounds. Then Arman has to try and rush for a finish. And he either has to rush for a finish on the ground or on the feet. And Charles is, according to Justin Gaethje, the hardest hitting 155er he's ever fought. He hasn't fought Arman Tsarukyan, but he's fought a lot of guys. He's fought Khabib, he's fought Dustin, he's fought Charles, obviously. He's fought against Edson Barboza at one point as well. He's fought Eddie Alvarez. He's fought so many guys with crazy power. He's fought Michael Chandler as well. And he's fought so many guys at lightweight who have crazy power. And to think that Charles is the top of that list would be crazy when we weren't really thinking about Charles like that guy. But it's something we have to rate, because he was able to do nasty things to Beneil Dariush as well, which Arman did too, but he did it afterwards, which is something to factor in there too. So with all of that considered there, I would think that if Arman's down on the scorecards, he's not going to be able to bring it back against Charles, because he's going to have to try and make big moments happen to try and bring back a decision or look for a finish there, and it's not going to be good for him. But if he is winning the fight, on the flip side, if he's able to control Charles on the ground, maybe he's winning a boring fight, maybe he knocks Charles down a couple of times and Charles is able to knock him down, maybe whenever Charles hurts him on the feet, it's not to the level Arman's hurting Charles on the feet, and Arman is able to capitalize and maybe shoot some takedowns on him, get him down to the ground, Charles is going to know that he is in danger of losing that fight by decision, and he's only ever lost one before, and it was ages ago. So he's not going to want to lose another one, and he's going to be rushing things on the feet to get the finish, which is dangerous for him, like I said, because Arman is dangerous on the feet. He can knock Charles down, and he could potentially knock him out as well. But I think that a Charles who is just even more aggressive than normal Charles, intent to finish you on the ground, is a really dangerous thing that could end up with Charles getting hurt, Arman knowing that this is going to be an aggressive Charles that's going to walk him down if he lets him get back up, him rushing into the guard and falling into a submission because, like I said, even though he's defensively responsible on the ground, his submission game isn't the caliber of Charles, and he loses those grappling heavy, scramble heavy fights against really high level grapplers, and Gamrot isn't as high level as Oliveira or Makhachev. Obviously, I don't think his scrambles are as good in the wrestling sense as someone like Gamrot, but his jiu-jitsu scrambling is going to pose serious problems to someone like Arman, I feel. So that means that it looks really rough for Arman no matter what is going on, because even if he's got a vulnerable, damaged Charles, he still has danger every turn. Whereas I feel like if Charles is up and Arman has to force the issue, I'm not as scared for Charles there of him getting knocked out or of him getting submitted by a Hail Mary of something like that. Now, this is one thing I want to show you guys too. Before I talk about this clip too, I do also want to note that Charles Oliveira's takedown defense is also pretty good. Makhachev's like the only guy who was able to recently take Charles down at all. Poirier failed like 6 takedowns on him. Obviously, Poirier is not like a super crazy grappler, but McGregor did pretty good stuffing takedowns against Khabib, and Poirier was able to take him down way easier than he took down Charles, obviously. But I just want to show you guys this clip, and I'll let you infer what you think about it. This is in his round 2 against this Joaquin Silva guy who's unranked. Arman Tsarukyan obviously ranked 8. He's kind of beating this guy up, and then this happens. Okay, we're going to leave it at that. If Charles clips him like that, the fight's over, guys. It's over. Absolutely done. He's going to pounce on the finish. He's going to get it. Charles can win this fight by whatever means he wants, because essentially, you guys know how there's like a burden of proof. You know, you have to prove your side before the other guy has to prove anything. Otherwise, the trial doesn't even happen in court. It's kind of like that. Charles is the standard. Charles can do whatever he wants. He can beat Arman by decision. He can submit Arman. He can knock Arman out. Charles can do whatever Charles wants to do, because he is Charles Oliveira. And really, that's all I have to say. I think that the evidence here is pretty conclusive that no matter how hard Arman Tsarukyan tries, he's not going to beat Charles Oliveira at UFC 300. I feel pretty confident about that, guys. Let me know how you guys feel about this matchup down below. Who are you guys picking in this fight and any other fights of UFC 300? Leave a like if you liked. Sub for more. Peace.